Okay, hello, Mr. Nirmal. This is Writersmelon. Welcome to Author's Corner.
Hi,
I hope you're
Priyanka.
having a great time. Thank you. It's
So,
very rare that we talk across so really different time zones.
I know.
And yeah, welcome to Writersmelon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about your latest book, which has really caught our attention. The one that is published with Aleph, your fifth book, which is Blue Sky, White Cloud. It is it is basically three novellas, so
Hmm.
three medium-sized stories or short novels,
Right.
and they are about three different animals. And it's a very interesting subject, and I would really want you to talk more about this book and what gave you this idea to write about animals as the central characters of your story.
Yeah. Well, this is the book for
Yes.
everybody, and the, I've always been involved in elephant conservation. I've always had what I think is a special affinity or a bond, perhaps, with elephants. Ever since I was, a kid, really, and I was on the steering committee of Project Elephant in the government of India for a while, and very involved in wildlife conservation in general in India. I saw this big elephant once in Kaziranga. I kind of like to think I meet elephants. You don't just see an elephant; you meet an elephant. I mean, they're such huge, imposing, intelligent animals, right? And I took a couple of shots of him, and I always thought I could tell the story of a bull elephant like this, who has been around. He's older than me at the time, right? And where he's roamed, I could. It must be stories there. So I thought about it, and I wrote a story called Lord of the Grassland, which was published in Singapore back in, I think, way back, 1994 or something. And wasn't distributed in India. I took like 20 copies, or maximum 100. I took
Okay.
personally and gave them to a couple of bookstores. But it did very well, and people really liked it. So anyway, that book came and went. And then I was during the pandemic. I was involved. I did some more creative writing because there was a little more time, and it was therapy for me. And I always wanted to write more stories as well. And then Aleph said, "Okay, we'll republish that story, and you add two more stories to it." And I've always been fascinated by the borderless worlds of wildlife. Humans are the only species, as I say in one of the stories, we are the only species that makes political boundaries, hard political boundaries,
Mhm.
on the only species on the planet.
Absolutely.
And I've always been fascinated by bird migration as well, and coincidences and transitions of life, both human and wildlife, and the interface. So yeah, these stories came out.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention it in your introduction. You're also a wildlife conservation wildlife conservationist, sorry, and a foreign correspondent and a writer. So tell us your journey before getting into writing books, and is this something that you do full time, or your writing interests are like varied across platforms, or how
Oh,
do
they're
you see
very
this book writing versus other writing?
Yeah, it's always it's a bit tough. I would love to write more books, but it really is all over. It's around, varies across platforms. But yeah, I got into. I always wanted to be a writer and a journalist, and I wrote my first book in Indian wildlife actually before I became a journalist, and I was working in marketing at the time, but freelancing as a journalist. That was way back. Then I moved to Singapore, got a job there with Business Times. Then after a few years, switched to Straits Times, with whom I'm now in Washington D.C. I'm the U.S. bureau chief of the Straits Times. And the Straits Times sent me to Manila. I spent 5 years in the Philippines and back in Delhi for 3 years, then 13 years in Bangkok, and 5 years now in DC. And so I've been a foreign correspondent, and each, how it is, every country is like a new job. You have to do it all
New
over
job.
again, start from scratch. So, and the media environment lately has the journalistic environment, the media environment has become so frenetic, and there's so much. It's a blizzard of information, and we normally track bad news, unfortunately, a lot of the
Yes.
time. So you do all this doom scrolling and whatnot. And during the pandemic, I did a couple of creative projects. I write poetry as well. I got it translated into Chinese and rendered in calligraphy, and had a show in DC and in Singapore. And I wrote these stories at the same time it was kind of therapeutic for me to do that, and it was,
I can
I
imagine.
wanted to create a story of something simple, something real, simple, like an alternative universe that is out there, but a lot of us just, we don't even think about it. We just take it for granted and
True.
forge on with our lives. So that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was just reading your book, and it actually talks about a defenseless male elephant calf. And then the second story is about a female leopard. And then the third story is about two geese. So, and it also, and the three stories are also across three different geographies. So I guess somehow your experience of travel and working closely with the wildlife was somehow merged into a fiction that you could weave around, and all your experiences or the research or the factual information that you had could
Yeah,
probably layer up your stories. So, what do you
absolutely.
enjoy doing more, the factual thing or the fiction thing? Because I'm sure fiction would have a special place in your heart.
Fiction,
Like,
I think fiction, because fiction sort of sets you free, really, isn't it?
yeah,
From facts, and it's like, as you said, the places I've been, the places I've worked in, the places I've seen, and the stories I've heard, and stories myself I've written in the past. Everything sort of informs the narrative. It's like a gigantic, complex jigsaw, right, which comes together. Uh, so yeah, fiction. I think there's a remarkable freedom in fiction. So I love that freedom.
and what would be like your central theme? Like, I mean, from what I understood, that it is a lot about trying to understand animals and non-human beings in a from a different aspect. But what would be like your message or like a key theme that you are trying to communicate through this? Like more of empathy, or I mean, what would be like a central message through these characters, human, non-human? What is the feeling that you would want a reader to feel after they read your story?
I think one of the central messages is that we often discount, or we don't even think of other species in terms of being intelligent and having feelings and noticing what's going on around them and intelligently assessing things to varying degrees. Yes, but we often completely discount it. Like you say, for example, cats. The layperson would probably say something like cats are so inscrutable, or the birds really don't register what's going on around them, but in my experience with animals, and I'm not even an animal, a sort of close in animal welfare kind of person who handles animals on a daily basis. They very much have feelings, and they know what's going on, and they have thought processes, right? And I wanted to sort of step out of the box, of the human box, a little bit, to show that kind of to show that there is agency, there is emotion out there. We're not the only. We're so anthropocentric, right?
Anthropology,
Yeah, no,
anthropology.
anthropocentric. I think
Okay,
that's, anyway, human centered, basically. Sorry, I
human-centered. Yeah.
haven't had enough coffee probably this morning. It's still morning in DC. Yeah, I wanted to show that, and also I'm fascinated by coincidences,
Hmm.
seeming coincidences, and this is a fascination, of course, many people have. Is there any meaning to these things? So that's why I talk about the
Hmm.
intersection of random, apparently random
Yeah,
intersections of wildlife species, a particular individual of a species with another, with a
with
human being,
another
for
human.
example, and
Yeah,
what it
very
leads to.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So, I would really love to know, how did you really pitch this idea? Did you pitch it as three novellas into one novel? How did the structure came about? Because it must have been a very interesting pitch to a publisher, I can imagine. And how was that process of pitching it or taking it forward?
I don't think it was the conventional process. It was
Okay,
it wasn't a conventional pitch or something. It was a very quick discussion I had
okay,
with
okay,
David Davidar at Aleph. It was a very quick discussion, and the ideas just evolved very fast in the course of 3-4 emails. It started with
okay, okay.
reprinting the elephant story, and then to do the other two stories. Okay, and this, and I wanted to bring in other things like climate, for example, climate change. There are some
Mm-hmm.
hints at climate
Mm-hmm.
change. So very quick discussion, and it evolved very fast. There was no pitch as such, and we just
Okay,
discussed it. Yeah.
okay. Okay, great. What would be your, let's say, suggestion to people who would take up writing as their career? Would you really encourage young people to go out there and start with something like journalism or something nonfiction, and then slowly moving into fiction? Or how do you see this market, especially in India right now? How do you see this writing as a career? Uh, because a lot of people in Writersmelon community are those who love to read books and are also those who are aspiring writers. So, what would be your key suggestions or guidance to them?
Well, writing has always been a tough profession to make a living out of, right? So that's a given. But
Yeah,
I would say writing of any kind, but especially fiction, is a great. It's very. It's a great release. It's very therapeutic. It's like playing a musical instrument, right? You expressing
true,
yourself through an art form. It's like painting, for
true.
example. You're painting. So I think that the value of that ability to express oneself, you know, tell stories is very, very important. And from my experience, I suppose maybe it's colored as a journalist. There are many kinds of writing, as we know, but maybe
Mm.
I'm colored because I've been a journalist. But I think one should write about things one knows.
Yeah,
That's how the authenticity comes in. I could not, for example, and
absolutely.
somebody else may be able to, but I could not, for example, sit here and situate one of my stories in a small village in Denmark, for example,
Okay,
without
yeah,
actually
that's
having
true.
going there and living there. Obviously, so write about what you know.
Authentic stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And Nirmal, who would be your inspiration in your writing? Like some authors, books, Indian, foreign, or maybe journalists. I don't know who are your inspiration as a whom do you really look up to as mentors or as inspiration? Whose work do you really admire and
Oh
read?
wow, that it's quite a long list.
Give us five.
Okay, well, I grew up reading the short stories of Ruskin Bond, who I think is a
Okay,
fabulous writer. Okay, then contemporary writers, I like Amitav Ghosh's work, very
okay.
readable.
Yeah, I think
Okay,
that's a very similar area, like the environment and the
somewhat, yes, yes,
conservation
yes, indeed,
space,
absolutely,
right?
yeah, 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 absolutely, you're right, yeah. So I like his work. Of course, I grew up reading the stories of Jim Corbett as well, right?
Yeah.
The great hunter turned naturalist and conservationist. So I have to list him as a major influence. Creatively, otherwise, oh, there's so many books. I'm at a loss sometimes too. I should make a list someday. Yeah.
Tell us things that you're reading now, like let's say this year you picked up some interesting books.
Well, I'm reading. I, I because of my work, I'm reading this Moral Combat. This is about
Okay,
how sex divided American Christians and fractured American politics. I'm reading this one by Marie Griffith. Quite interesting.
okay.
Then I often
Sounds
read
heavy.
Basho's Haiku,
Okay.
and I have these are the books I actually.
Wow, this is amazing that you actually have the books around you, so we don't have to Google the names.
No,
We
no,
can
no,
at least
no.
see
And
this
so
in the
yeah, these are the
video.
books I have lying around, and I have several. Oh yeah, here. Yeah. Then I read a lot of Japanese poetry, the Manyoshu,
Okay,
and this one, 100
okay,
Poems from the Japanese, Rex Roth. So these are the books I
great.
have on my table, and I sort of go to occasionally. And then I'm trying to
So,
finish Pachinko by Lee Minjin, and that's a brilliant book. But it's a big book, and my problem is time to sit down. I have to have the luxury to sit down and devote 3 hours to a book.
read,
Unfortunately, in my
big
profession,
luxury.
is a luxury.
Very true, very true. So, what plans next? Do you have any other book already in your head brimming up, or do you have any plans to write another book? Because this is your fifth book, right? So you're not like writing very
Yeah,
consciously or very regularly. So as
yeah,
in from a
yeah.
published
Not yeah, not all
novel
the books
kind
have
of
been fiction,
perspective.
of course. One was on Thailand, for example. Um, I do I do want to write another book, but it's too early now. Yet my thoughts are still forming around it, and I could also get involved in another creative project, like my poetry project, which was an actual installation. Um, I feel I'm a great believer in it happens when it's right, when it's ripe.
Yeah.
The time has to ripen,
Yeah.
and it'll happen in time. But I'm beginning to think of it, and something will come of it eventually, I hope. But it's too early to
Absolutely.
talk about
Absolutely.
specifics. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, wish you all the best and thank you so much for talking to us. I really enjoyed it. It gave me a completely different perspective of how one could really approach a story from thinking from human perspective all the time. If you start uh, looking at animals and considering them as the central characters of your book and your imagination, this is a very interesting and a different perspective. And I loved reading the blurb. And once I downloaded it on Kindle, the first few chapters are also very interesting. So I'm looking forward to reading it and wish you all the best
Thank
for
you.
your
Thank you very
future
much for having
endeavors.
me. Thank you very much
Yes,
for having me. All the
welcome.
best out there. Cheers.
Bye bye. Thank
Bye.
you.